Jim the Ape Want Proof. Hello again, humans. It is I, Jim the Ape. And after receiving some heat for my last video, wherein I was trying to help someone who I felt was in need, I wanted to clear the air about something. I am not a virtuous person. I'm an abrasive, often apathetic asshole who spends most of his time thinking about his own interests. I hate humanity in general, and children especially, because they're just smaller, more selfish, and more annoying versions of what they will eventually grow up to be. I identify as a misanthropist, and my pronouns are nigger, cunt, and faggot. Respect them or you're a bigot. And I don't give a shit if you donate to Trish or not. If you don't want to, no one's holding a fucking gun to your head, so fuck off and spew your bullshit to someone who has the tiniest modicum of respect for it. Because that isn't me. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the subject of today's video. Ironically, this little piece of propaganda presented itself to me on Facebook after I had tried and failed to actively search for a video to respond to on YouTube. It comes to us from the Young Turks network, but it's not Chunk or Banana or Borkowitz or any of the familiar faces from their main videos. This is some TYT third string bench warmer whose name will probably appear in the video, but I don't care enough about it to say it here. So, without any further ado, let's begin.
All lives matter, and that should go without saying. This Black Lives Matter battle cry, the goal should be, and always has been, equality.
All lives matter.
White lives matter, black lives matter, Asian lives matter, Hispanic lives matter, blue lives matter. What is so controversial?
Oh, Sean, you silly, silly man. Don't you know? If you say white lives matter, blue lives matter, or even just all lives matter, you're saying that black lives don't matter, because that's how that works now. Black people are victims of an evil, oppressive society at all times and in all circumstances, and if you don't push that narrative by supporting their movement, that just makes you another racist who's part of the white supremacist system. Now, doesn't that make perfect sense?
Okay, so do you guys want to carpool to the travel ban protest, or... Guys, okay, what about Standing Rock? Indigenous lives are all lives, right? Guys? Okay, what about the Women's March? Tommy, I know you want to go. All lives matter, right?
I find it interesting that none of the things you listed are matters of life and death. At least not directly. You have the travel ban, which I have mixed feelings about, and I might get into that in a minute. But it's not like people are being executed for not having the proper identification, so it's not their lives that are in danger. Same thing with Standing Rock, except it's just some stupid land dispute over a pipeline. And to be honest, I couldn't give a shit about that when it was relevant news, much less now. And last but not least, the Women's March. The one that many people tried and failed to identify the specific point of. There was anti-Trump sentiments, Black Lives Matter support, Madonna talking about blowing up the White House. By the way, I'm still waiting for Mark Hamill to read that quote in his awesome Joker voice, but I think he has a partisan bias preventing him from seizing that opportunity. The only thing that was clear was that they wanted to exclude any groups that were anti-abortion, even if those groups were headed by women. Now, I'm pro-choice in the sense of legality, while not being a fan of the ethical implications of the procedure. But I find it ironic that you're saying that people who say all lives matter should have been at the Women's March, because not only were some of them there, but they were not welcomed with open arms.
People around the country gathered to protest Trump's executive order to ban travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries entering the US. I sat there scratching my non-existent beard, asking myself, where are the All Lives Matter advocates now?
Okay, first off, no one gives a shit about your facial hair or lack thereof. Secondly, those countries were apparently selected by President Obama as kind of a watch list, and Trump just copied the list over to the executive order. Also, I find it troubling that Saudi Arabia isn't on the list, considering their insane Sharia-style justice system, and the fact that they're the biggest funders of terrorism in the world. But I guess they're our allies or something, so, you know, whatever. But another thing I wanted to point out is, how do you know there weren't all lives matter advocates at those protests? Are you psychic? Did you put a tracker on every person who ever tweeted that hashtag or typed those words? Or is it just that your libtard bias is telling you that you have to push the narrative that none of them showed up to those protests? I think it's that last one.
You know, the ones who spoke out in response to Black Lives Matter, who felt that it was unfair to single out black lives when there were other non-black lives at risk as well. Those who felt that Black Lives Matter meant that black lives mattered more than others.
I've said this so many times before, but let me try to summarize it as quickly as possible. 1. Black Lives Matter, the statement, is a far cry from the violent, anti-white, anti-cop, extremist ideology that the movement has become. 2. There are ways to address issues with law enforcement that don't require you to divide people by their skin color like it's the fucking 1920s again, you fucking retards! And 3. No lives matter! Insert Fight Club quote here, life is meaningless, we're all gonna die, the universe will reach a state of perfect entropy, the end.
And when you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist.
Okay, Giuliani just reminded me of something about the travel ban. There's an excellent video by Count Jacula that I will try to remember to link in the description. But basically, he shows a clip of Rudy G, and in it, he's saying that Trump did refer to it as a Muslim ban in a conversation with him. And he was asking for advice on how to do it the legal way. Now, I don't know about you, but that does seem shady as shit to me. Granted, I think if you want to come to this country, you should be thoroughly investigated, and if it's found that you legitimately are a criminal or have direct ties to a terrorist organization, you should have to take your shit and go back to where you came from. But if it checks out, then you should be allowed into the country and put on the path to citizenship.
You know, those who deliberately fucking decline to see Black Lives Matter as a movement highlighting the demonstrable evidence that black lives do matter less than white lives to the criminal justice system.
In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate but equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the social justice warriors who prosecute the officers. These are their stories. Bum bum. Anyway, the problem with this argument is that crime rates are higher in poverty-stricken areas that, for whatever reasons you want to try and dissect, are heavily populated by blacks. There's also a big problem with fatherless black children turning to their local gang leaders for that paternal influence, as was illustrated in one of the first scenes of Marvel's Luke Cage on Netflix. So, police interact with more black people, and more of the sort of common street criminals are black. Not that that justifies any actual racism or racial profiling on the part of the police, but it does go a long way in explaining why so many of the cases that are propped up as evidence of racism on the police force turn out to be a lot more justifiable when you look at the facts from an unbiased perspective. Hint: Michael Brown never had his hands up, and he never said, "Don't shoot." Also, Sandra Bland killed herself.
And instead, formed a competing hashtag as a means of undermining Black Lives Matter without actually doing anything to support all the other lives they claim to care about.
How do you know? How do you know that was the intention of the hashtag? How do you know that none of the people using said hashtag were doing anything to help other people? How do you know any of this shit? I think I know the answer, and it's that you don't. You're just pulling this straight out of your ass, or more likely, out of Chunk Yogurt's ass. Oh, and about the whole burning house analogy, it doesn't work. The only person who sees a burning house is a crazy old man who claims to live in that house and to speak for all residents of it. But he doesn't show where the smoke or the flames are, and maybe he's even trying to start a fire in the neighbor's house. This analogy may have gotten away from me, but the point is, you're talking shit, dude.
So here we have another discriminatory attack on another group of people in this country, one that targets people based on their religious beliefs, something you would think would upset anyone who's expressed concern for the fair and just treatment of all lives. Yet our otherwise highly vocal All Lives Matter advocates have said, well, basically jack shit on the matter.
Again, I think some of the circumstances surrounding the travel ban are shady, and I only agree with it to the point that people who are demonstrably threats should not be allowed in. But to be fair, you're conflating race and religion here, and those are two very different things. Your race is chosen for you via genetic roll of the dice, whereas your religious beliefs are either taught to you, indoctrinated in you at a young age, or chosen by you based on your own critical thinking, or soul searching, if you will. That's not to say religious beliefs should be grounds for automatic discrimination, but you do at least have some say in the matter.
So where are those righteous souls who thought that every life was so precious that we simply couldn't afford to focus on just one group of people when so many others were suffering? Do Muslim lives not fall under the All Lives Matter umbrella? Or are they exempt in the small print along with black lives, Mexican, gay, trans, refugee, or basically everyone who is not white?
Once again, I am in the No Lives Matter camp myself, but it could be said that I believe that all lives matter equally, as in not much to not at all. Regardless, you're making the leap from people saying all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter to them somehow being white supremacist? What the fuck, dude? Why do you so badly need to divide people by race and pretend like black people are the only ones who have problems? Because, you know, there's a word for dividing people by their skin color, whether you do it mentally or physically. It's called segregation.
All Lives Matter supporters could not give two fucks about any other life than theirs or those who look like them. All Lives Matter is not a movement formed to represent all groups regardless of race and ethnicity. It is a not so thinly veiled effort to deflect attention away from systemic racism.
Where's your fucking proof? If the racism is systemic, then that means you should be able to demonstrate that a system is in place that specifically disadvantages black people because they're black. You know, it's like in math class, when you'd get a word problem and at the end of it, it would say, show your work. That was done so that you couldn't just pull an answer out of your ass and expect the teacher to accept it. Much like you can't just make broad assertions with no evidence and expect me to accept it.
The only reason All Lives Matter ever came about was because people started saying Black Lives Matter. If they really were for all lives, then where were the All Lives Matter banners at Standing Rock, or at the Rally for Immigrants' Rights, or the Fight for 15 March, or the Women's March, or in the airports this fucking weekend?
You know what, laddie? It sounds to me like you're saying anyone who didn't show up at those there protests was no true All Lives Matter supporter. Is that what you're saying, you ninny? I bet you put sugar in your porridge, don't you, faggot?
Was this not your time to shine? For you to tell the world, hey, all lives really do matter to you? Or has the narrative now switched to Americans first? Oh, so do you mean black Americans also? Well, okay, what about Hispanic Americans? Oh, okay, white Americans.
Gee, it's almost like when you're pushing your narrative, you can just completely fabricate a fictional opponent who you never name or say anything specific about that makes it easy to make yourself look like the smarter or more morally correct one in comparison. I think there's a name for that, like the scarecrow something or other. I don't know. But you may notice I'm not doing that here. I'm responding directly to you, Scottish TYT puppet, and the things that you specifically are saying in this video.
The point of All Lives Matter has always been to diminish the message that Black Lives Matter.
I find it really fucking ironic that you're showing a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. along with a counterpoint that no one ever said, considering he said in that speech that he dreamt of a world where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And guess what? All you want to do is judge people by the color of their skin. If they're black, they're racially oppressed. If they're Mexican, they're victims of Trump's mighty phallic wall. If they're Middle Eastern, they're victims of religious discrimination. And if they're white, they're victims of nothing ever, no matter what anybody does to them. Is that about the long and short of it? Also, the content of your character is dog shit.
Or that they should matter more than they do. A message that becomes ever clearer when all we hear are crickets over Trump's travel ban or anything that questions a white right-wing narrative.
What? Dude. Dude, you could literally say that about either side and it would make as little sense as it does there. What about the protests you spent this entire video jerking yourself off about? What about the left-wing narratives that you're currently fucking pushing in opposition? It's like you're on a football team, American or European, it doesn't matter, and you're turning to a teammate saying, well, I don't see any of them scoring goals for us. They must be selfish hypocrites. Of course they're not, you fucking moron! They don't show up at your protests because they're not on the same side of the issues as you are. And if they have a narrative, they're probably not going to question it, just as I'm sure you don't question yours. Ugh, let's wrap this up.
So I'm sorry to break it to you, but if there's anyone at the airports waiting for an All Lives Matter advocate to come and save the day, I'm sorry, but you've got a better chance of seeing David Duke teach in Hebrew school. So in the interest of being honest, maybe now All Lives Matter protesters can drop the pretense and rebrand the movement to represent what they should have been called from the get-go. White Lives Matter. I'm sorry, I meant only White Lives Matter.
Yeah, everyone should trust the expert analysis of some bagpipe-blowing bitch boy who thought Unfriended was a good movie.
The unique way that it's shot, and the unique way that it can portray fear without really seeing that much at first, like from just fear from just having someone there that you don't know who is there.
In the meantime, I think I'll stick with saying no lives matter, because you can't be accused of discrimination if you literally hate everyone. Anyway, that's gonna do it for me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. If you didn't, I really don't give a shit. Fuck off. If you like my content, subscribe, click the bell icon, turn on notifications, email YouTube saying you want to see my videos, sacrifice a few chickens to Cthulhu, and maybe, just maybe, you'll catch my next video on the homepage. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, and this is usually where I'd shill my Patreon, but I need to look over and potentially change all the perks sometime soon. So in the meantime, if you have any spare change, please toss it to my friend Trish to help her and her family from becoming completely homeless. They're living out of a hotel at the moment. If you don't want to do that, I've already been over this, you don't have to, so fuck off. As always, thank you for watching, I'll catch you next time, stay great, apes.